Hello there, my name is Timothy Thiero. Today I will be teaching you about two key chemistry concepts, ionic and covalent bonding. So let's get to learning. This is Dude Bro Hank. Hank just happens to be someone who's very curious about the world around him. While Hank was on his daily stroll, he spotted a lucky penny on the street. Hank loves pennies. This was the highlight of his day. He was so excited to head home and polish it. Before we continue with Hank, let's zoom in a little, shall we? This is a compound called copper oxide, and it's the main compound that makes up pennies. Copper oxide is a great example of an ionic bond that is fairly common. In simple terms, an ionic bond is a bond that occurs between a nonmetal and a metal. When an ionic bond forms, the atoms both become ions due to their loss or gain of electrons. Maybe a story will help you understand this concept a bit better. But before we start, let's talk about the characters. This is copper. Copper is a transition metal and can be found here on the periodic table. Copper is pretty boring, dedicated, because their only goal in life is to have a full valence shell through getting rid of their 2 extra electrons. This is oxygen. Oxygen is a nonmetal and can be found here on the periodic table. Like all atoms, oxygen's goal is to achieve a full valence shell. To achieve a full valence shell, they must gain 2 valence electrons through bonding with other atoms. Now, let's get into the story. Oxygen was fed up with living their life without a full valence shell. They were unhappy and constantly compared themselves to other atoms. All they wanted was 2 electrons. Was that really such a big request? It seemed like the rule of octets had always been so easy to reach, yet they'd still have not found an atom to bond with. As for copper, they were also very unhappy. Copper wanted to bond with someone so bad, but still hadn't found the right atom. They were constantly comparing themselves to the noble gases and other compounds. Sorry for interrupting the story. I just wanted to let you know that you just saw sodium chloride, another great example of an ionic bond. Sorry again, but these dudes need to be mentioned. The noble gases are the atoms that everyone wants to be. These funky fellows were lucky enough to be born with full valence shells. Anyways, back to the story. Copper was enjoying a blissful morning in the park. That same morning, oxygen was tired and decided to go on a walk. When oxygen spotted copper, it was love at first sight. It was an instant bond. They spent hours just talking in the park. They both decided to create a new compound together. How cute. Here you can see the copper atom transferring its 2 extra electrons onto oxygen's valence shell. Now, after the loss and gain of electrons, each atom claims their own ionic charge, and they lived happily bonded ever after. And that concludes our first story. Now, let's learn about covalent bonding. Remember Dude Bro Hank? As we touched on earlier, he has a bit of an obsession with shiny things. While out on another stroll, he picked up some vinegar. You see, Hank had read on Google that vinegar makes pennies shinier, so of course he had to give it a try. And before we continue with our friend Hank, let's zoom in once again. This is a compound called acetic acid, and it's the main compound that makes up vinegar. Acetic acid is a great example of a more complex covalent bond. For now, let's explain covalent bonding with a simpler example. Similar to ionic bonding, the main goal of this bond is for both atoms to reach a full valence shell. However, unlike ionic bonding, covalent bonding occurs between a nonmetal and a nonmetal. Instead of exchanging valence electrons, covalent bonded atoms share their valence electrons. Maybe another story will help you understand this concept a bit better. But before we start, let's talk about the characters. These are our characters, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They are all nonmetals and can be found here on the periodic table. Like all atoms, they have a goal of achieving a full valence shell. They can achieve their goals through bonding with other atoms. Now, let's get into the story. Copper A and Copper B were sick and tired of being just a boring element. All of their siblings had already gone off and created all sorts of amazing compounds, leaving them behind. Their only goal was to create the compound acetic acid, and they knew they could do it. All they wanted was to fulfill their family's legacy. And so, they were off to find some friends. The hydrogens weren't doing much better. That same day, carbon atoms spotted the group of hydrogens. They were so excited. And so, they decided to create a new compound. Together, they form a compound called vinyl radical, which is a type of plastic commonly found in packing peanuts. They were happy, but the hydrogens still felt bad for leaving their brother behind. And so, they were off to find the missing hydrogen. While looking for him, they ended up bumping into two oxygens. The oxygens had been looking for a nice molecule to join, so they decided to ask. And so, the two oxygens joined their compound. They have now formed the compound acetate. Now, in case you hadn't noticed, acetate is a polyatomic ion. Polyatomic ions are ions which consist of more than one atom. The atoms in a polyatomic ion are usually covalently bonded to one another, and therefore stay together as a single charged unit. Essentially just a charged molecule. Anyways, back to the story. After a while, hydrogen D was getting worried. Finally, after a long time of searching, they came back to their original spot and found their missing hydrogen. And with hydrogen D becoming the final part to their compound, they reached their goal of forming the compound acetic acid. And they all lived a wonderful, not boring life in their happy compound. The end. And that concludes our lesson. I hope you enjoyed it.